So my name is Alex Figueiredo. I was the writer, co-director, producer, and actor of the film 43 York Road. Actually, it's the place where it was shot. We shot in my house at 43 York Road, which is not far from here. But in the context of the film, 43 York Road is the whorehouse, because the film is about a prostitute. So that's where he performs.
What has been your filmmaking journey up until this film?
I've always enjoyed filmmaking and I want to do it. I think acting is something that I see myself proactively doing every day, or trying my best to get auditions and get in the room and things like that. And filmmaking, I'm less in a rush. I'll gladly take years with a project, or I'll gladly do that at a certain later on point in my career. It's also not something I make money of, whereas acting, I'm at a point where I can gladly say I do. Filmmaking wise, this was my first film. I did one short before that I directed, a 5-minute short, because I did a film program in Prague Film School. So I did a tiny short there. This was my first official film. And the funny thing about it is there wasn't a budget.
How did you go about prepping your shoot on the knowledge of that money may not have been coming from a readily available source?
I think first of all, I wasn't planning on making a film because I'm not actively a filmmaker, as I said. I work as a runner and things like that, and I've worked as a PA on sets mainly for the money, but it wasn't a passionate thing. So artistically, I wasn't very involved. However, with this, I remember I met up with a friend of mine who is a straight man, but worked as a male prostitute. And he made loads of money with it. And he had these crazy stories about it. And he paid he had so many loans, and he paid for a lot of things with that money. So he made a lot of money from it, and he has these incredible stories. So that really stuck with me. And I just kept thinking, wow, I never thought about it. And he had so much shame around the job as well. I just kept thinking this isn't talked about enough, or there's a lot of taboo around it. And I think that really got me hooked on the idea, so much so that I ended up coming with this story. Because then I asked him, what kind of stories happened? Did you get a lot of closeted gay old men who would come to you? And those were most of the clients. And I found that fascinating. And that's how the story came about. The budget, I think the budget is, I just realized that all I needed was 2 actors, a conflict, and a room. And then in my head, okay, a whorehouse. I just imagined, these American motels where the M is falling off. In my head, that was the place. So I just dressed my own room as I just put, these old looking wallpapers. I got props from different schools, and my drama school at the time borrowed a lot of props, things like that. It just really looked like an old, stuffy, stinky, alcohol smelling place. It looked like a place where either this character Lucas would live in, or his clients at. So I think the budget wise, I didn't have any resources, and I couldn't really pay rent either. So it was just I had to make it work with that. When you don't have a budget, it relies a lot on your acting, your writing, your directing, and that's about it.
Your friend, who sort of gave you a lot of impetus, gave you a lot of ideas for the film. Did you work with him in any capacity whilst making the film? And would you like to talk about it?
Yes. Thank you for that question. So my friend who worked as a male prostitute, who borrowed me the costume and the wisdom and some of his personal stories, I was often in contact with him, and he would read the script and go, this is how it would work. You would find your clients online. They find you online. The film takes place early 2000. So it was like an online thing. So he would walk me through those things. He would walk me through the role playing. The prostitute is going to ideally play a role that the client would be happy with. Maybe not play a role at all. Maybe there was a lot of talking, which I wrote Lucas, the character, as someone who's really fed up with that. He's really done with clients coming in to have a cry. He's really done with straight, closeted men who's, just always the same issues, and the wife and the this and the loneliness. So he's at a point where he's very blunt, he's done with it. So he's very cold about it, just me, let's get out of here. I don't want to hear your shit. I know who you are. I've met thousands like you. Get over it, move past it, whatever. Me, get out. So I think he walked me through how the dynamic can be. I'm not making any statements on the job itself. It has nothing to do with sex workers or anything like that. It just, to me, that's just another thing about Lucas. I think he as a character is very interesting, and that just happens to be his job. So the film isn't any statement in any way. I just try to be as accurate as possible.
A lot of queer stories revolve around sex work, a rich history of liberation, but also abuse. How did you do your research in crafting Lucas's character? You said from a friend who also did sex work previously, but how did you go about crafting him as an actor as well?
I remember because I'm gay, in case you didn't know, I read a book. I read a lovely book called The Velvet Rage. I think I heard Andrew Garfield say once that he read that book to prepare for a gay role. And I read the book and it really fascinated me because it talked about the shame gay men carry living in a straight man's world and what it feels like and how that is shown through, sex life and addiction and things like that. So there's a point in my life where I read the book and it really touched me because I really identified with a lot that was being said. And then together with this straight friend of mine, pansexual perhaps, who had this story with prostitution. It was just something in my head. I did not consult anyone. I basically wrote a lot from my own feelings. I think Lucas's character, so the character that I play, the prostitute, he very much hides behind the role of a prostitute because I think oftentimes there's a lot of role playing and makeup and things like that, and you put on different personalities. And that I saw was the character's way of rejecting, denying his own self by putting on different faces. It was a way of him to steer away from the grief he's going through. And I think that I relate to that as a gay man. And on the other hand, you have Malcolm, who is the client, who is not comfortable in his sexuality. And he is rejecting that by having a wife and kids and living an unauthentic lifestyle, so to say. So they are very similar in a way. I think it's to do with the self-acceptance and grief. Self-acceptance within the LGBTQ plus community.
The film is a meditation on grief.
Yeah.
How did you approach the sensitive topic when writing, and where did you draw your own inspiration from?
Yeah, if I'm honest with you, I have not experienced grief myself. I think where grief comes in is mainly the fact that both characters are going through grief and they're dealing with it in a different way. Both of them are kind of denying that part. They're not accepting the loss that they're facing. And what ends up happening is that they share that vulnerability and they come to accept that grief and that journey with each other. Initially, it's meant to be a sexual encounter. And the ironic thing is it's not about sex. It's a different type of vulnerability that is exchanged. So grief is just a representation of the pain that they're both going through. So in a way, the film is not about grief. It's more about, I think there's something that they're both going through. It happens to be grief, but they just kind of see and help one another without doing it consciously. I think they both kind of connect in that way. And to me, that's what the film is about, that connection.
The film approaches male vulnerability across different generations. The film is almost a diffusion of the negatives of masculinity. Was that a goal in creating the film, and do you want to talk about that some more?
I think it's the fear of emotion, the shame of being gay, and I think that's something that even straight men have. The fear of femininity, the fear of women. I think sexism is that, it's the fear of women. And I think you see it a lot in Malcolm's character, who is a gay man who's married to a woman and who's repressed that his whole life and who has finally decided to book a male prostitute to fulfill his desires. So it's a really sad thing, and it's more often than we think. I think our generation knows that it's, I think there's a lot of closeted older men out there. I don't think it's that uncommon. But that's definitely, you see a pinch of that. And I think Lucas, the prostitute, kind of pokes at that a bit. his defense mechanism to keeping his pain hidden is to then poke at others in their insecurities. So he pokes at Malcolm. Oh, you know, you're a closeted old man and you want to me, how ridiculous. And then what ends up happening is that Malcolm then pokes right back at Lucas and sees right through his pain. And that kind of opens both of them up a bit. But that's definitely an interesting topic. And I'm glad if as a viewer, it can be picked up. And hopefully this gets better, you know, with future generations, that there are less closeted daddies out there.
Did you find being both an actor and director useful when working with your co-stars? How did you juggle acting and directing simultaneously as well? Was that a challenge that you faced, or was it enjoyable?
It was I'm never doing that again. I mean it, I'm not joking. It was really tough. I'm not doing it again. I was so invested in it that what happened is I was naturally, in my own time, taking up all of the roles, not because I wanted to or because I'm good at it. I'm not a good cinematographer. I'm not a good art director. I did end up obviously hiring an entire crew, and I hired a lovely woman called Giada, who was a brilliant cinematographer. But obviously, I just ended up taking on multiple roles because I was kind of forced in with the project. So when it came to executing the film, it felt like I was passing on the homework that I had been doing. And it almost felt like people were more like executing it. And I wanted to give everyone the liberty to decide, obviously, as much as possible. For instance, we had a whole art department. I kind of told them, listen, these are my thoughts. What do you think? Decide. And then when they made up their minds, they would leave. And then I was left with all the wallpapers and stuff in my house. So I would just kind of do it. So it just came to a point where I just ended up doing all these things. And my issue with directing and acting at the same time is that looking at the film now, I didn't completely let go. And what I see in the film, one thing that I'm not very happy with when I watch it, is that I can see myself directing myself as I act, instead of having this trust and letting go, kind of surrendering the character to this other force, which we call the director, right? I don't feel as though I've done that, because I was also multitasking and thinking scheduling and thinking this and thinking that. And I had a lovely co-director, Charlene, who's obviously brilliant. And I don't think there's anything she could have done differently. It was just a me thing. And I think when you, as an actor, I was so passionate about the story that I was trying to overtell everything. And I think if I were to shoot it again, I wouldn't try to show so much with my face. I would just trust that it's all there. And there's nothing for me to try to tell with the face, the writing, the setting. It does it all. I can sit back and just perform. If you've been a part of the whole producing process and then you show up to act, you need to let go of the producing process. You need to be able to say, we're running late, ADs will fix it. And that's not something I did. I caught myself multitasking a lot to make it all come together. Instead of like just detaching, I surrender, you know, each person, they know what they're doing. That's a trust thing, right? I'm working on it.
Despite it being all set in a small room, it looks incredibly rich and cinematic. So what other methods did you do to make this film look even bigger than it was? You know, it's big emotional stakes. How did you represent that?
So the film is split into 5, I would call it, it's a one scene film. It's all one scene, one place. I split the film into 5 little scenes, which you could associate with the 5 stages of grief, so to say. It's not really that, although the final act of the film is that sort of acceptance, that closeness. I think that gave the film a certain rhythm and the cinematography as well. So in the first act, when both characters are introduced, they are each in their own separate thing. They're in their own separate universe. You sense Lucas's inner thoughts. You sense his, like, he doesn't want to be there. You get a feeling he doesn't like to work as a prostitute. And you're introduced to Malcolm, the guy coming into his environment. The second act, the second scene, so to say, is when they start to engage in sex, so to say. So it feels almost claustrophobic. I think it's quite shaky. It's extremely close. The camera's extremely close. The sound is really vivid. You can hear every breath. You feel nervous with Malcolm. And so I think the shots kind of represent that journey. So in a way, it's one room, but having that style of cinematography that kind of matches where the characters are at with each other makes the place look more dynamic. In a way, I'd like to think you forget that it all happens in a room because the blocking kind of sells it. And then you kind of finish. I really like the final shot, which is just, it's the first time we see them both from the back. We don't see their faces at that point. It's kind of their moment. So it kind of leaves you thinking, what happens next? Or now it's up to them. Or now they're on their own kind of thing. And the audience just gets to sit with a certain distance.
The film features music over the credits, but otherwise uses sound design to great effect. How did you approach the film's audio? And was the choice to have no music artistic, or did you have different varying ideas when you were building the story? Tell us about it.
So the choice of having no music was artistic. We have a lovely sound designer called Damien, who's spectacular. He's wonderful. He's very talented. I think the idea of it was that there's a certain tension that builds up, and in the end, there's a certain release. It's like they both take a deep breath for the first time in a while. They can both be vulnerable. They both cracked open something very heavy that they were carrying. So that's the first time we get a very soft, maybe a bit sad, maybe a bit neutral kind of music. I think it's the first time they're able to feel. And I think the silence that grows throughout the film is meant to feel quite loud. I particularly like when it gets very sexual, more towards the beginning, and we can really hear, the breaths and this and that. And I would think that as a viewer, it makes you feel quite uncomfortable, so that you kind of feel what Malcolm is going through. He's tempted to have sex with Lucas, but also extremely afraid, and he's so full of shame. And I think the sound really helps sell that. The thing about music and film is that I think sometimes you don't need it. I think sometimes often, the acting is enough. So the music might try to overdo something. What
advice would you give to other young filmmakers pursuing this?
Oh, no. Well, who am I, innit? No, I have one. It's, I think oftentimes when you're in film school or when you're starting out, you want to make something big. And there's always killing scenes, and you always want the shock effect. And you need big budgets and big this and props. And I think simplicity is key. Because when you're starting out, you often don't have the resources, the money, the equipment. So you might as well go for simplicity as much as you can. Get two actors, a conflict, and just good writing, good acting, good directing. Plan your shots wisely. But you see students out there making, spending a couple of thousands on a film that never came or looks a bit, Whereas if they would have spent their time and energy on a script, which is what matters most, on their actors, then they could have done that for half the money.